Folks, you're going to love today's show. Have none other than the amazing Sam Sorbo, speaker, author, activist, host of the Sam Sorbo Show. She's also married to Kevin Sorbo. I'll tell you what, Hercules' wife is pretty strong herself. How you doing there, Sam?
Thanks so much for having me. That was a good, very nice introduction. I call myself Hercules.
Hercules. I love it. I love it. Well, Sam, like we were talking about before we recorded, the demand for women voices, it's always been a demand. I mean, gosh, since the biblical days of Deborah, who led the charge, or the very first person that was given the commission to tell the disciples that Jesus has raised from the dead was a woman. And so I saw a meme the other day, if a woman can bear the Savior, she can definitely preach about him. But, Sam, you are known as being an incredible actress, as well as a speaker, advocate, not only for America, not only for parents and their children, but also for the homeschooling demographic. There's so much to you. I can't wait to get a hold of your show. Folks, go to the bottom of your screen, samsorbo.com. Sam, tell us what you're up to right now.
I'm very excited because I'm producing a home learning conference. I'm calling it the Playbook for Home Learning because everybody who attends will get a playbook on how to teach their children and how to think differently about education, because parents are really in a conundrum right now, in a quandary with everything that we're seeing in the schools and what they're trying to do to children. And I mean, we're seeing it here in Florida, most notably, although this has become now a national issue, what the activists are calling the Don't Say Gay bill, which is simply a bill that says, hey, let's not sexualize 5-year-olds. Right. And the activists and the Democrat Party now has sort of doubled down on, yes, we will we will sexualize 5-year-olds. We will groom them. We will tell them everything about lubrication and all the things that we want them to know about sex toys in kindergarten, which I'm hoping will be a losing issue for them. But at this point, parents are on the losing end of this because they have previously entrusted their children to public schools, thinking that the public schools had their best interests at heart. Now the blinders have come off and parents are realizing the public schools don't really care about your kids in the sense that you think that they care about your kids. They're really out to groom your children and take advantage of them and manipulate them and mistreat them and really ultimately abuse them. And so sadly, parents are now saying, okay, so now what do? I understand that school is actually dangerous for my child, but what am I supposed to do about it? And I have the solutions for them because I've been a homeschooler for well over a decade. I've got 3 nearly grown children, and I've been teaching about it for quite a while. I did a show on Epic TV called School's Out with Sam Sorbo. And what I talk about is all of the different paradigms that exist within the school system that are bad, right, that are anti-education, that we just take for granted because we think we know what education is. Why? Because we were taught what education is by this education system, right, that is getting it 100% wrong these days. So back when we learned it, okay, it was only 80% wrong. But we still think that that's the right way to educate. And so I'm trying to set parents free from the shackles that public school put on them in their thinking about how to educate their children. And of course, the Bible's very clear on this. God's very clear on who is responsible for educating the children, and it is the parents. And in fact, our courts in the United States are very clear on who is responsible. In every case that parents have brought to the courts, alleging that the school failed to teach their child how to read or how to do math or anything, that the school failed, the courts and the judges have always found that it's the parents' responsibility. And so we've had this sort of chimera where we've thought that we've handed off the responsibility, that we've delegated the responsibility to the schools. But that was just a ruse. We never did. It's always been the parents' responsibility. And what I discovered when I started homeschooling is the fantastic joy that exists when you take back that responsibility and you own it. and then you take charge. And it's not nearly as hard as you think. And it is so much more rewarding than you ever dreamed. Right. That now I talk about the sacrifice that parents make in sending their children to school, which is far and away a greater sacrifice than the quote unquote sacrifice that I made to educate my children at home.
Well, I'm so glad that you do. And I'm so glad that you lead by example. You have such a strength to you. It gets all over me, Sam. The deliberate attempt by our enemies who give so much money to our education system to destroy our country, starting with the young. You know, if you were going to educate the children of your enemy, would you not break down the family? Would you not de-emphasize the foundations of their constitution or their founding? Would you not try to stop the procreation of a generation of warriors who would defend their country? Would you not try to rid them of their hope and their faith and their morality?
I would convince them that they should kill their own children.
Right.
That would be a great place to start. I'd convince them that they themselves have no value, that they're just accidents of nature, that they're not created. They're just an accidental thing that happened, eons ago, and that they are insignificant. And I would convince them that bullying was the best way to survive. That the world was just comprised of survival of the fittest, and that there is no rhyme or reason to the world. All of these things, by the way, we are convincing our children when we send them into public schools. Right. And that's why my first and foremost goal is to get Christians, of all people. Christians should not be sending their children into public school. Right. And if you think that an hour or an hour and a half of some kind of churching every Sunday is going to mitigate for the damage that's inflicted on children in school, then I have a bridge to sell. Like that's just that you're believing in a fallacy, sadly. But it's not just that. It's when you keep your children home and you choose to educate them, and it's just not as hard as people think. But the reward is the relationship that you have with your child. And so many people, when all my kids were teenagers, I'd say, yeah, I have 3 teens at home, and they would roll their eyes. They're, oh, wow. And I'd say, what do you mean? And they say, well, teenagers, am I right? And I'd be like, nope.
No,
not in my case. Yeah, my teens and I have an amazing relationship with my children because I built it, because I didn't outsource my authority, right? When you drop your child off at school, you're tacitly telling them the school knows better than I do, and they have the authority. And so when your child in 4th or 5th grade comes home and starts challenging your authority, don't be surprised. You set it up that way. And in fact, they're right, because you told them you don't have the authority. The school has the superior authority. Right. It's all great when the values mesh and your values are aligned with the school's values. And that's why, like, for non-Christians, I'm like, well, okay, I guess. I mean, it's still not good for the family, no. But if your values are the same as the schools, and you think that abortion is just fine, and basically abortion is birth control, and that sex should be happening all the time for everybody, because that's what they convince children of, then I don't have anything for you. But for Christians, no. You have to be clear. They want your children, right. And they're going to get your children. Right. Because you're outsourcing your authority, and they have your children for the majority of the day, for most of their waking hours, for most of the things that count, plus they have the authority. So you lose.
Yeah. And you know what, even on an educational level, before there was the public school system, literacy rates were the highest. The knowledge of history was the highest, mathematics. But the systematic plan to disassemble the family has been in place for generations. People bought into this lie that you go and get an education. They call it an education here when it's so inferior to other countries. And then you get a degree to get a job you hate, so that your kids can go to college and get a degree, get a job they hate, and on and on and on. And a lot of the issues that parents have with teenagers are the result of this crazy darkness that is being propagated in the public schools, from the image issues and cyberbullying now. How many issues are avoided and averted, and how higher of a quality of education would your child have if they were educated? Are people seeing this? Are people waking up to the fact that Hollywood hates them? They can't trust their media. They can't trust their government. That the only thing they can trust is God.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because before we started this conversation off air, you said that it used to be what did you say? It used to be secular versus Christian, right? And now it's really just good versus evil. And I sort of joked with you and I said, oh, it's always been good versus evil. We were just distracted into thinking that it was secular versus Christian, but it actually has always been good versus evil. And it just didn't seem that evil before. Right. I mean, if you go back and you look at like I used to watch Friends growing up, right. and I go back and I look at Friends episodes now, everything is about sex. Right. Literally everything. Right. And it's about free sex all the time with no consequences, which is not at all the real world. Right. They set up this fake world. It's like Madonna went and had a child out of wedlock to show the world that you can have a child out of wedlock. Nothing works that way. Rachel on the show had a child out of wedlock, and she became a mother, and they showed, it was like crazy, and it was hard. But then the child just disappeared because the writers didn't want to write about the child anymore. And so, the assumption is, she just had a child and everything's fine, and the child will grow up, and children are resilient. I mean, I remember watching Oprah, and she had on I can't remember who it was. It was a Hollywood star who was going through divorce. And she said, and how are the kids? And then before he could even answer, she answered her own question. Well, kids are resilient. No, they're not. We don't value our children anymore because for decades, like this has been going on, this good versus evil has been going on for a very long time. Right. We've been conditioned to not value our children. And it started with the whole public school movement. Send your children away from you. Let the experts take care of them. You don't know enough. And I'm telling people, you teach your child to use a knife and fork, to tie their shoes, to dress themselves, to bathe themselves. And then all of a sudden, when they turn 5, no, you're no longer needed. Let the experts teach them the alphabet or how to count or their colors or further, right? No, I'm sorry. You are more than capable because God gave you those children. And we say, as Christians, well, children are a gift of the Lord. Do we not? And then what do we do with that gift? We hand it off to someone else to open. What do you think the Lord thinks of that? If I'm giving you a gift and then you take the gift and you go, oh, thank you. Here, would you open this for me? Right. Well, how does that make me? I mean, come on, folks. We really have to wake up. And the problem is we've all been brainwashed because we all went through the system. My gosh, it took me over a decade to reach this point, and I'm still in the process of discovery. But let me walk you through just briefly the beginning start of this whole new way of thinking about education. Mm-hmm. What's the first thing you learn in school? When you want to ask a question, what do you have to do?
Ask the question. Raise your hand.
There you go. Yeah. Raise your hand. So the lesson that you're learning is visceral because it's embodied. You actually embody it. Okay. Wow. And this lesson is what? You need permission. Yeah. You have to draw attention to yourself. A lot of kids don't want to do that. Okay. You don't know. The teacher knows everything. Right? There are lots of lessons in just this one gesture. First thing you learn in school. So let's boil those lessons down. They all boil down into one crucial thing. And that thing is, don't ask. Just don't. It's too much effort. It's too much. There's too much implied. Don't ask. Okay. That's the number one lesson.
Lose your voice, lose your individuality. kind of perhaps muzzle your child, perhaps?
Right. If you want to learn, you got to get over this hurdle first.
Right.
Okay. So the first lesson is don't ask. I won't go through the second two, but the second two, so the three lessons are don't ask, don't try, don't think. Now, if we say that education is at minimum a quest for knowledge, what does that begin with? A question.
Right.
But don't ask.
Wow.
So our education system is literally the opposite of education. It's a deterrent.
It's sinister, is it not?
Yes, it is. It's a deterrent to learning.
Wow.
And that's why I'm really trying to break parents out of that mold and understand children are naturally inquisitive. Children are naturally curious,
right,
because they're imbued with a sense of purpose in their lives to seek out God.
Right.
That's the natural state of things. Education system is there to break that down, to teach them that there is no God, there is no purpose to their lives, and to tell them that learning is hard and not interesting. And that's why most kids, by the time if they even graduate high school, by the time they're graduating, they're like, oh, if I never have to crack open a book again.
Right.
That was just so boring. History is the most boring subject. Why? Because they don't want you to know who you are, where you came from, or where you're going.
Exactly.
So all of this to say, if you just bring it home and work with your child and get some advice, come to my conference, talk to my other homeschoolers that are on the website. We have a website called Underground Education.
Yes.
That is basically just a community of people who are embarking on the home learning journey. You can do this. Your child is innately gifted. All your job is not to be the teacher. And who wants to be a teacher? I mean, nothing against teachers. I love teachers, and I never talk badly about the teachers.
Right.
It's the teachers' unions and the system that is against the child, not the individual teachers, although there are bad teachers. By and large, most of the teachers are great people. But if you want to bring learning home, you don't become the teacher. Please don't become the teacher. That's the worst thing for your relationship. And it's really not a great thing for the child, right?
Okay.
Sure. In the very young stages, you teach your child how to tie their shoes. That's easy, right? But when you bring learning home, what you're doing is you're allowing the child to discover on their own. It's what I call self-teaching, because I'll tell you something. You won't learn anything, Brant, that you don't choose to learn first.
Right.
You have to make the choice to learn it. Then you can hear me if it's something that I can tell you, or you can hear it from a video on YouTube, or you can read it in a book. But until you make that choice to learn it, you won't learn it. You'll memorize it for a test because they've coerced you into getting the grade. Right. But you won't learn it unless you choose to. So,
wow.
I'm very excited about this stuff.
I wish you were passionate about this more, Sam. No, I love how strong you are, how intelligent you are, and how well spoken. And please don't take that wrong, because usually people that have your combination of giftings do not usually invest it into others and raise up others. They usually just keep it to themselves and want to draw everybody to them. But you empower people to rise up and to educate their children. I was intrigued when you said, don't be the teacher, help them learn, to choose to learn and motivate them, keep your family dynamic, but still educate them. But 22 years ago, I was an adjunct professor in Tulsa, teaching intro to world religions and intro to philosophy 22 years ago. And it was spoken on major university campuses that, quote unquote, we will rid these country bumpkins of their God. It was spoken way back then. And of course, decades before that, we know. Well,
they've been trying to rid us of our God for over 2,000 years, and they're not terribly effective. Have you noticed?
Oh my gosh! But have you noticed, Sam, that with a child? See, I noticed this over 20 years ago. If you want a child to put together a puzzle, they'll say, "Great, show me the picture," because they need to see the picture so they can put the puzzle. Well, this I would say Luciferian ran education system now, funded by our enemies, literally, says, oh, there's no picture. It's whatever you want it to picture to be. There's no mold. There's no standard,
Yes.
and if you're a film of a Braveheart or battle terminology, the standard is the flag. That if you saw the standard lowered, literally the battle was being lost. I know it's a different kind of standard, but I think about that, about don't lower your standard or your standards in a free for all that's without any kind of moral code. No, man, look what happens to this. Look what's happening now with everyone gets a trophy and there's no right and there's no wrong. And 4 + 4 is 5 if you want it to be. It's insane. But people need to understand it is a deliberate attack by our enemies, but ultimately from the prince of the power of the air. And we know the king of the air. And I'm glad that you were on the air, Sam. Tell us about the Sam Sorbo Show, if you would.
So the Sam Sorbo Show is I do an hour podcast a week, 1 hour every week. It's also a radio show, and it's on YouTube and Rumble and Locals if you want to go to sorbos.locals.com. And it's basically, I look at culture and current events, typically through the lens of education, because what I've realized is that everything begins and ends with education. The way we see the world is irrefutably siphoned through the lens of education and how we were educated. And so I take that approach because education is my passion. It is what unlocks us and frees us, is our education. So right now, our education institutions focus on college prep and career readiness. And you alluded to this a little while ago. Their interest is in college prep and career readiness by their own admission, right? So career readiness, if we look at that, we're seeing that they're failing because kids are graduating college and they're not ready for a job, much less a career. Okay. So career readiness, we'll take that off the table. It's really about college prep. And if you think about college prep really is simply preparing the child to go to college, or at least preparing them with the inclination to go to college, with the impetus to go to college. In other words, convincing the child and the parents that they have to go spend a lot of money. Why? Because college gives you a better job. What's a better job? More money. So the idea is to convince the parents to spend a lot of money so that the child can go earn more money so that he can pay them back. It's really a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, it is, because they don't get paid back anyway, but that's not the point.
And now the children are complaining that they've spent all this money, they're deeply in debt, and the government should bail them out. And you know what? Sadly, they actually, not that I buy it, but they actually have a case, because it's the government's fault that they never learned how to budget and not overspend for something that they weren't going to get. The government convinced them you will get a better paying job if you spend all this money. And that's a Ponzi scheme.
It is.
That's a ruse. And it's a disaster on our children, when so many of our children shouldn't go to college because they're much more able to be tradesmen. And there's nothing wrong with being tradesmen, but our education system has made it like, who wants to be a blue collar worker? As if that's a bad thing. You know, I have a friend who's a plumber, never went to college, has a very successful plumbing business. Right. The guy owns 3 houses, like prosperous. Yeah, I think so. So it's not that you can't make something of yourself. In fact, I really encourage kids to avoid college at all costs.
Well, do you know how many start?
I'm sorry. I shouldn't joke like that, but I got to say, Charlie Kirk and I are on the same page. It's not what college you're going to, it's why. Right. Why are you going to college? Because unless you have a very good reason, there's no reason to go to college. Number one, you don't need a high school diploma to go to college. Number two, you don't need a college degree to go to medical school or law school. People have to really think about this. They just assume. Most people assume, well, you need to graduate high school to go to college. No, you don't. And by the way, those colleges, they want your money more than anything.
Right.
They'll find a way to get your money.
Oh, yeah.
If you just give them an excuse. Okay. But secondly, you don't need to graduate a college to go to med school. If you pass the MCATs without going to college, I'm sure that medical schools are going to be very interested in that. How'd they pass the MCATs without even going to college? Wow. That's amazing. And in fact, Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, they're all recruiting home educated children now. Wow. Because the home educated youth think outside the box. They're much more likely to be problem solvers than children who are institutionalized, think within the box, and only think about what's the number one question in schools today? Number one question in the classroom. Teacher, will this be on the test? Because they are taught to regurgitate by rote everything that they are told. They're not taught to think.
They're not prepared for life. They're prepared to do whatever it takes to get by and pass the test. Ask me how much my bachelor's degree has done for my business. I'm successful. I have all the freedom in the world. But how much did that degree do for me? Absolutely nothing, folks. You know, it takes life education. It takes a moral code. It takes a picture of what the puzzle is supposed to look like. And you're not going to find it in public school, but you will find it when you get the right sources, the right educational resources that I'm sure, Sam, you can point people in the right direction for the resources to help educate your children at home.
Yes, that is my mission.
So samsorbo.com. Of course, the Sam Sorbo Show. Sam, I really hope that we can air your podcast as well. So many millions of people on cable, on digital formats, also over the air TV towers. They need what you've got. They're getting what you've got. But in West Texas, the last bastion of American freedom, if you ask me, the richest, most patriotic part of the country, people don't realize we need what Sam Sorbo has. And I'm so honored that you've been with us today, Sam.
Thank you. I'm so happy to share.
Please tell me we can do it again.
Absolutely.
And we love you and your husband, and God bless you and keep you and make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you, give you peace and prosperity. And I can't wait for more of the world to hear from Sam Sorbo. Thank you again, Sam.